The Ward Scott Files is produced by Ward Scott Files, LLC.
Come on, everybody! Come on, everybody!
This is a Ward Scott Files advisory. The Ward Scott Files radio show may contain material not suited for people who are easily offended. Trust us on this. This show contains adult information and opinions. Please protect small children, sensitive pets, fragile houseplants, and liberal relatives. Thank you.
All right, good morning, good morning. Here we are in the man cave with Professor Ward Scott, the warthog here. And lots of things going on in the world today. We welcome you to the show. Hope everything is doing fine with you. I think we're finally warming up here in north central Florida. We'll get a little warmer. We've been having some chilly evenings, but this is April, wonderful month here in our section of the country. And I got so many different things that are going on that are worth talking about because we are, you know, in the battle for the survival of America. And there's all sorts of little skirmishes that take place all the time that are very interesting to keep an eye on because they add up. And as they add up, victories are won and victories are lost. And it's pretty clear that the Democrats are panicked. They're divided among themselves. They can't figure out whether the impeachment is a good thing for them, even though there's no real good reason for that at all. In their minds, they want to try to use it to garnish votes and get all that stuff ready for their 2020 run. And a few things that I've collected together today here under one type of title. And I don't have the answer to the question, but the ultimate last question after all these individual skirmishes we'll talk about have to do with will they ever get to Hillary and Bill, who are the most crooked family in the history of the United States. Really, they were crooked all the way back to Arkansas. They've always been selling and peddling political influence all the way up to the Hillary deal, the Secretary of State, where she peddled uranium for speaking fees for Bill. And now she's had the audacity to come out yesterday and say that she's read the report and she thinks there's enough there to impeach Trump. And you know, and everybody's just doing ceiling stares on that. How can this woman say this with a straight face? Well, this woman's been lying pathologically all her life. And pathological liars don't really have a sense of truth. And so it doesn't bother them to lie. And whatever they need to say at the moment to sustain what they're doing is appropriate for them. And that saying that they use is if a lie apply uses it. But there's a couple of things I'll start out with, and my title for the next few items that I'm going to share with you, and you can answer this for yourself if you're so inclined, or you can wonder about it as I do, or many others do, and that is whether or not the worm is turning. And by that I mean, are we going to turn the tables, and we're going to go take a look at the corruption, the real collusion, that, of course, was spawned and sustained by a crooked Department of FBI and Department of Justice, certain individuals in it, and of course all the way into the White House. So they are some instances that lead one to be curious about how the war is going, and one I want to start off with is the IRS. Now, the IRS is, you know, Sleazy Cummings is the one who has asked for, and then that whole committee that he runs has been misrepresented, you know, as and it's way beyond its dutiful, or you know, its dutiful bounds. But the whole deal is, does the IRS, you know, have any business giving up Trump's returns? And I'm looking around here in the Midnight Auto Yard for some things that are relevant to this, but. The Treasury Secretary, Stephen Mnuchin, issued a pointed letter just yesterday stating that his administration would not make a congressional deadline. Here it is. Why would not make a congressional deadline, all right, for turning over Trump's IRS, Internal Revenue files to Sleazy Cummings. And we know why Sleazy Cummings wants them. He just wants them to hammer Trump because it's not an objective look at all. And besides, there's no business for him looking. It has nothing to do with what? Trying to defeat Trump in 2020. That's what it's about. So Stephen Mnuchin, I think that's why we say his name, maybe the M is silent, issued a pointed letter And he called the request a culmination of a long-running, well-documented effort to expose the president's tax returns for the sake of exposure. So he blasted this House and Ways Means Committee focus on a single taxpayer, the president. In other words, that's one issue. Why would you just single out the president to look at the tax returns? If you're going to single out, if you're worried about people paying their taxes, and heavens knows there's all sorts of people who don't pay their taxes, what are we doing here? I mean, why are we singling this guy out? Well, the only conclusion reasonable people can reach is that you're doing this because you don't have anybody else to pick on that is important as Trump is, and so you're going to use and weaponize, once again, the IRS, which Obama already did, as he did with the Tea Party. So the outcome is that Trump has now sued Sleazy Cummings as one thing, and this ultimately will go all the way to the Supreme Court. And there's a very important thing at the Supreme Court now that we'll talk about also. That's another one of these skirmishes that could have very, very long-ranging effects. So now he's been told, well, you know, okay, if you don't have it now, have it by May 6th. But the IRS head is saying, well, I'm going to consult with the Justice Department first to figure out whether legally I have to do this. This is another stalling technique, which is legal, and it's a good question. I'll go ask the Justice Department. I'm going to ask you. Your committee's been corrupted for a long time. Why should I go ask you? And then besides, he said, this is the serious question you're asking, and it's categorically different from just requests for income tax return information. It's obviously been politicized. So, you know, this is going to go back and forth, and the Daily Mail has reported this, and other websites have reported this, that Trump, in the end, I don't think he's going to hand over his tax returns. I would certainly not advise him to hand over his tax returns. It's none of their business. You know, when you go down and register to be a candidate, for example, as I do, when I did, you can put your tax returns on there, or you can make a financial statement and swear to its credibility. And you know, it's not a must do the tax return. It's no financial reason. My golly, we get down to Gillum here in a little bit, you're going to figure out that right quick. You know, people can run for whatever and be flat broke and be rather shady about it on top of it. So it's unlikely that anytime soon Sleazy Cummings, who's the House Oversight and Reform Committee, they've expanded the definition of that committee as we've reported before, will ever be successful in getting his tax returns. But what they're trying to do with this, and what they're trying to do with this conversation about, well, you get their tax returns or not get their tax returns, is keep all this stirred up in the public conversation so that you don't have to worry about Trump's ratings. They're trying to drive Trump's ratings down by keeping all this confusion in the minds of people out there on the street who really don't pay much attention and rely on very superficial reporting sources. And that's one of the ends means of Sleazy Cummings and Bug-Eye Schiff and these others, is to keep the heat on, just stir it up and drive down his ratings, and then maybe you'll be able to increase enough voters who are misinformed, underinformed, to actually get back the White House, which is the end goal in all this. With any one of the number of 20 or so bad candidates they have, I can't see a single candidate on that side of the aisle that has any real quality to them. And my golly, they may all end up impaling themselves on each other's sword as they fight it out to see who's going to get to the head of the pack. So the question comes up by Jay Starkman. Let me just go back over and talk about how the Wall Street Journal talks about. Jay Starkman is a certified public accountant, and he says, why should Congress see Trump's tax returns? What is the reading about your neighbor's income and that of celebrities? Is that turned into our national pastime? Most of the time that there's requests for tax returns, Jay Starkman writes, is from women wanting to know how much alimony to claim, what their husbands owned, that sort of thing. It's really dubious as to what the motivation is, even if you look at it on the surface. Now, the scope of how a congressional committee disclosure law has never been litigated. So it's unclear what the limits are. And I'm sure that Trump's lawyers have advised him, since it's unclear, we'll take it all the way to the Supreme Court and we'll find out. And that will take a while, and that will stall him off from getting the tax returns. So Trump's returns can be competently, and here's the other thing, and I think this is the most important thing to understand, that the quality of the minds that would look at these tax returns, and this man Starkman just comes out and says it, it's unlikely that 6 years worth of Mr. Trump's returns can be competently reviewed in executive session to assess the IRS audit. Few, if any, of the 42 members of the Ways and Means Committee know how to prepare a tax return. I think that is really interesting. Few, according to this accountant, and I think common sense would tell you the same thing, few of the 42 members on the committee that Sleazy Cummings chairs would have the expertise to be able to look at Trump's IRS returns and have any idea about how to assess them, let alone analyze a return. In Trump's case, would be thousands of pages. So, and they probably don't have the staff to do it. So it's clear, without the staff who can competently do it, and without anybody of the 42 members of the committee who can competently do it, well, you have got nobody other than political hacks who would take a look at that tax return and know what he was looking at. So that will be in the news nevertheless, and if you don't watch it, the source will say, well, geez, you know, Trump wouldn't stonewall. Still on the air, yeah. Trump is covering up, and Trump is not, you know, being truthful, and there's something to hide. That's the end result of what Sleazy Cummings is trying to do, create, as I say, enough doubt in the mind of the underinformed voter that things are maybe not right, all is right with Trump. So that goes into our little analysis today as to whether or not indeed the worm has turned, and I think Trump will be able to successfully keep Sleazy Cummings and those people from using their political motives to look at his financial statements. And for one reason, they don't have the expertise to look at them. This is coming from the Gateway Pundit, and I offer it to you. You know, I almost call this, are the wheels coming off? In other words, does the worm turn, or are the wheels coming off? And by that I mean, is the Trump-Russia collusion hoax going to actually get to the bottom of the origins of it? And the Gateway Pundit has cited an article here by Jim Holt, and I'll just share it with you. And you can kind of look at it askance, or you can look at it as however you would like to see it. But this Russia Gate, they've called it Russia Gate after Watergate, of course, which I was around to watch. The Russiagate affair began with documents released by groups funded by billionaire activist George Soros. That's now coming clear. All right? George Soros funded the groups that gathered the documents, according to Jim Holt, and that it's now becoming clear that this was under Barack Obama. The U.S. Embassy in Kiev worked closely with Soros-related groups to compile opposition research on the Trump campaign. Now, several U.S. media outlets, according to Colin McMahon, who's also writing about this, have reported on the Ukrainian origins of the Russiagate hoax, and some of those that have reported on are the Epoch Times, The Hill, and the Gateway Pundit. And the Epoch Times reported on April 10th, 2019, that the charges against ex-Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort originated with Ukrainian Representative Lesesko, who was director of Ukraine's Anti-Corruption Bureau, And this whole thing was being sought after, this guy's relationship, and some sort of solicitation of that was being financed by Soros. That doesn't really surprise any of us who have kept our eye on George Soros. George Soros has invested billions in Ukraine before the conflict there broke out in 2014, and he's been instrumental in helping bring down the government of Kiev. and he also stands to make a big profit out of Ukraine. So it stands to reason that this relationship, which we've been watching quite a while, Soros is even behind dumping money into the Andrew Gillum campaign. We know that that money, quite a bit of it, was coming from him for the Gillum campaign. So that is another item that I read into the skirmish. Will it go anywhere? Does it mean anything? I'm back to my question, will the wheels come off? There's also very, very strong evidence, and Judicial Watch is saying this. Now, Judicial Watch is a pretty credible outfit. Okay, they do the very heavy lifting. They do the public records requests and all this. And they say that the FBI has admitted that it found Hillary Clinton emails in the White House, in the Obama White House. Now, this was announced just on April 23rd. Today is the 24th, so this was yesterday. Judicial Watch announced that a senior FBI official admitted in writing and under oath that the agency found Clinton emails in the Obama White House, specifically the executive office of the president. And the FBI also admitted nearly 49,000 Clinton server emails were reviewed as a result of a search warrant for her material on the laptop of Anthony Weiner. So this is kind of interesting, is it not? Is this another indication that the wheels are coming off or the worm is turning? The court has ruled that the Clinton email system was one of the gravest modern offenses to government transparency. And so Judicial Watch has found that Hillary Clinton and her former staff and government agencies, and here's, some of the people who had to respond to Judicial Watch's inquiries. Cheryl Mills, Office of the President, United States Department of State. There's a bunch of people that Judicial Watch went after to find out what Obama knew and when he knew it. So this guy for the FBI has said, hey, yeah, Obama had it. And it was an astonishing confirmation as far as Judicial Watch, and the author of this article, Holt, says, that was made under oath by the FBI, and it showed that the Obama FBI had to go to President Obama's White House office to find emails that Hillary Clinton tried to destroy or hide from the American people. Now, Tom Fenton is the Judicial Watch president, as I've said up on this, and he says, no wonder Hillary Clinton has thus far skated scot-free, which I add the last part. Barack Obama is implicated in her email scheme. Now, this is according to Tom Fenton, who is the head of Judicial Watch. Judicial Watch's reputation is impeccable. So I put that in the category of is the worm turning or are the wheels coming off? Hey, that's pretty heavy. It just came out yesterday. And what Judicial Watch wanted to know was whether or not Clinton intentionally attempted to evade the Freedom of Information Act by using a non-government email system, whether the State Department's efforts to settle the case beginning in 2014 amounted to bad faith, and whether the State Department adequately searched for records in response to the Judicial Watch's Freedom of Information Act request. Now, if you listen to the other news channels and everything around here going on, the big conversation is Barr actually going to follow the yellow brick road now and go find the real crimes? And everybody seems to say, who knows him, that he will. And of course, we got this IG report coming out. So I'm just giving you kind of a preempt of what is coming down. Now, the other thing that I think Trump is very smart to do is he is opposing his aides testifying, and he's taking executive privilege to do it. And why shouldn't he? If I have my aides, and I have my aides there because I have confidential conversations with them, that's my executive privilege to have those confidential conversations. And I'm not particularly interested in having Sleazy Cummings or Bug-Eye Schiff or any of the other guys who've got a political vendetta because they lost the election, asking my aides for stuff that's none of their Sleazy's business and none of Bug-Eye's and none of Fat Jerry's. So, and of course, Trump, in an interview with the Washington Post, and that's like an interview with the devil, because the Post hates Trump. He said that Trump said that complying with congressional requests were unnecessary after all the things he says we did to cooperate with the special counsel. So he says, hey, I'm not going any further with this, especially in Congress, where it's very partisan and it's getting more partisan, so I'm not going to let my aides go down there. So he has ordered his aides to stay away from answering any of the subpoenas from Sleazy Cummings or Bug Eyes or Fat Jerry. And they plan to fight all these subpoenas that are issued by the House Judiciary Committee. The first one they fought is for that White House counsel, Donald McCann. They've asserted executive privilege over him and really given the international fighter pilot salute to Sleazy, Fat Jerry, and Bug Eyes and said, it's none of your business, man. These are my people, and they operate with me, and I'm protecting them under executive privilege. And if they want to fight it all the way to the Supreme Court, let them fight it all the way to the Supreme Court. You know, this is the way it's going to go, all the way to the election. And then, of course, the press will put a spin on it that Trump is being defiant, that he's hiding something, that it's still more of the cover-up that Gould suggested was always there but couldn't find evidence of. So here's a case that if they don't have evidence, they're going to try to create evidence. Now, how will they create evidence? They'll create evidence by issuing this partisan subpoena and then, of course, putting the White House in a position where they'll have to deny the subpoena. And then, of course, Bug Eyes and those leaking it to the press to say, see there, we just know he's hiding something. Otherwise, these guys would come down and freely talk. And, of course, if they come down and freely talk, there can be perjury traps and everything else going on, and it's all a political grandstanding show. So I put that in there, and I ask you if, indeed, you think the worm is turning or the wheels are coming off. The other thing that happened, of course, is Trump has sued Sleazy Cummings and said, you know, you need to back off, and we'll see how that comes out, because that's another tactic that, of course, his lawyers have using to present this type of defense, which is entirely reasonable. Now, there's also, I mean, this is kind of all in the package of you know, what is going on here with the wheels. Are they coming off? Are we going to be able to get to the bottom of all this? It's the greatest story going on, the greatest mystery part of the story going on right now is to whether or not they will actually pursue this. I think they're going to pursue it. I think it's going to be a very serious pursuit, and it's got all sorts of, I say, little skirmishes here. The evidence, Gateway Pundit also has a comment here, written by Joe Hoft, who's a guest post, and he says the evidence shows that the Obama deep state may have unmasked Trump's business associates as early as the spring of 2015. So there's new evidence now that shows that Obama's deep state was spying on Trump business associates as far back as the spring of 2015. And this was the same time that candidate Trump decided to run for the presidency. So the individuals that were being spied on may have been unmasked. The Wall Street Journal reported in July 2017, shortly after the Gould investigation started, that investigators are, quote unquote, re-examining conversations detected by U.S. intelligence agencies in spring 2015. So, obviously, what we know now is that Obama's using the U.S. intelligence agencies to spy on a political foe, really in this case, before the political foe was even a legitimate political foe. And Obama, used all these agencies, particularly in this case, the intelligence agency. And Trump was right about this all along when he said he was being spied on by Obama. And the press was trying to say, oh, no, that can't be so. Obama surely wouldn't be doing that. He's pure as a driven snow. He can't be doing that. And we know that the Trump business associates, according to the Wall Street Journal, were spied on by the spring of 2015, long before the Trump Tower meeting. And they really believe that was a setup by Obama's deep state FBI and DOJ. The Trump Tower meeting was a setup by the Obama's FBI and Department of Justice, and that occurred June 9, 2016. And so that's almost a year after Obama started spying on Trump business associates, and Trump wasn't even a candidate yet. So many of these people now would be, of course, dragged through an inquisition by sleazy Cummings if let's face how this would work. You go to the tax returns, you pour through the tax returns, you find all the people that Trump did business with, you haul them in, you put them under oath, you try to catch them in an embarrassment or a lie. They've got to defend themselves out of their private pocket. This is how you ruin them. Then you get them scared and they say anything they need to say to get you to stay off their back. This has been really an embarrassment to the nation, and it has to be dealt with at some point, sometime, somehow. So to summarize what we've got, and does the worm turn, I've got one more thing that is kind of interesting, but IRS, I don't think they'll get his tax returns. We've got evidence that Soros paid for a lot of this skullduggery, which he's been doing all along. We've got evidence that Obama is implicated. Trump is fighting back by opposing his aides testifying. The last thing we want to talk about, too, is how important this decision is coming up about citizens being non-citizens on the census. I got to find here my my report on that, and that's very important. That's going to be before the court today, and people are trying to read the tea leaves and see how the court is going to rule on this. And right now, they seem to be thinking that the court is leaning towards saying, hey, we're not going to let you count non-citizens. And that is a huge deal. And because we know why they want to count the non-citizens, the Democrats, because that will inflate, of course, the voter rolls for them, and they will become ingratiated to this. There's a big question now that's going to be ruled on. This is going to be huge. And David Rivkin and Richard Rail, who are practice appellate in constitutional law, have gone into this and said that the deeper political and legal question is there's a deeper one behind this, and that is, of course, has to do with factoring these aliens, and we know this is the end goal. Factoring these non-citizens, all right? If you go out on the census and you count citizens and you count non-citizens, then the next thing the Democrats will do is factor these non-citizens or aliens into reapportionment and redistricting. And it won't have anything to do with immigration status. It will be a reward, basically, and we got a good example of it here with Gainesville publicly saying it's a sanctuary city. So you would think there'd be a lot of non-citizens here who would be counted as on the census, and therefore they would go into the mathematics of reapportionment and redistricting, and so it would reward those policies designed to subvert basically what this is. Okay, basically, according to Rifkin and Rail, basically what this is an act designed to subvert the Immigration and Nationality Act and to achieve an enhanced representation at the expense of the law-abiding states, okay? The law-abiding states. So get this, you would have the violators already, which have said they're sanctuary states, sanctuary cities, like California and places like that, who are already griping that they can't do something by the popular vote and kick out the Electoral College. By putting on the census the count of the total bodies rather than citizens, they would use that to swell their influence in the national election. This is all going on and will be a very important type of issue that the court is going to have to deal with. And right now, the people who are watching the body language of these justices think it's going to go in Trump's favor, as it should. I mean, whoever said that you count every mongrel in the country, then you, of course, dilute or render null and void the validity of those who are real citizens here. So this whole thing, this is a real situation that we need to keep our eye on today. It involves the Voting Rights Act. It involves such words as majority minority districts, what eligible voters are. There's a lot of things at stake here. This is written by Rifkin. So that, I don't know if that goes down in favor of the Trumpsters and his lawyers and his approach that you should not have on the census any counting of non-citizens, then that in our little deal here about whether or not the worm is turning or the wheels are coming off, I would think that would be kind of a victory for the Trumpster. Now, the other side of all this, of course, is crazy Bernie, who has come out with some of the most ridiculous stuff that's caused a national furor, and that is whether or not inmates can vote. And the Washington Times has got a conversation about this. There's a lot of conversations about it. And people have said right away, well, gee, many Christmas, if we did what crazy Bernie wants, we would be letting the Boston Marathon bomber vote. Because evidently, and this is in the Washington Times by S.A. Miller is the author, and there's lots of other places you can find this conversation as well. Apparently on Monday, Bernie Sanders said he wanted prison inmates to vote in elections, including convicted Boston Marathon bomber Tazarnav. I think that's how you say his name. And this is what he said in this, of course, Communist News Network conversation in a town hall type forum in, of course, the bastion of liberalism, New Hampshire. He says, I think the right to vote is inherent to our democracy. Now, there's a mouthful for you. I mean, really. I think the right to vote is inherent in our democracy. Yes, even for terrible people. Well. What is this guy talking about? Of course, he's talking about trying. Listen, Hillary not only cheated against Trump, she also cheated Bernie. You have to understand that. They went out and politically assassinated Bernie because, see, Hillary, this was supposed to be Hillary the liar's turn. And she blew it twice. You know, she had it once before. She blew it. This time she'd have blown it again. But she did go after Bernie. And Bernie might have taken her out had she not cheated on him. That involved lying Donna and all those different people. So Sanders said he took the position despite knowing it could be turned against him by his rivals in the Democratic presidential nomination. But he said restricting voting rights, even for a convicted murderer, would be a slippery slope toward undermining American democracy. Listen, I mean, how do you get to that reasoning? I mean, are there no consequences for heinous behavior? And we're going to get into this on the state level here in a minute. Are there no consequences to this? I mean, is there nothing that really has any kind of responsible for? This guy is one of the, pick him out as an example of somebody who, I don't know if he voted before. I mean, so you're going to give him something, a right to do, maybe he never even did before. I mean, so Sanders says that restricting voter rights was a type of policy, here we go with the inflammatory language, currently pursued by, quote unquote, cowardly Republican governors, seeking to suppress the vote. I'm going to come over and focus on Florida here in a moment. DeSantis would be, according to Sanders, and I'm sure Sanders has got DeSantis in mind. DeSantis would be one of the people Sanders would consider a cowardly Republican governor. So Sanders calls himself a democratic socialist. There's no question but what you've got socialism running against capitalism in this election. And right now, the stock market's as high as it's ever been. The economy is doing really well. The price of oil is up because Trump has boycotted Iran oil. And so we shut off that source, and it's driven up the price. But, you know, Trump makes decisions and decides it's more important to stop Iran than it is to really, you know, cave in to supporting that regime by ironically buying their oil, and then their oil goes to support terrorism against us. Their oil profits goes to support terrorism against us. So he goes into this, he says it may be in jail for 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, their whole lives. But I think the right to vote is inherent. That is the kind of stuff, I try to impress upon people, what's going on in the country and what's at stake. And if you don't confront these type of things, you don't call them out on it, then you get blown away and overwhelmed by it. So it's really, something to bear watching. Now, as that go into the worm turns, I think that's just off in a category. I put it in a category by all by itself, and that is crazy Bernie. We also got Pocahantas, of course, who perhaps gets the prize for wanting to spend other people's money to pay off debts that other people incurred that they knew they were incurring, and therefore, we should just excuse them. So we're going to excuse bad decisions by the students. We're going to excuse bad decisions by convicted felons, and we're not going to we're going to make the good people pay for it. We're going to make the people who get up every day and go to work pay for it. So it's really quite a story that's going on. Meanwhile, Trump is fighting this on all battles. One of the important things, and I'm thinking of our guest yesterday, Elio Piadra, who was so dynamic. Tim McGraw was going to go to Cuba to perform. I don't know if you know this. Tim McGraw was going to go to Cuba, and now Trump has cracked down. Here's why Trump wants to put pressure on Cuba, because he doesn't want Cuba anyway through the surrogate Russia enabling Maduro to stay in office any longer, because Russia has already come in and has done with Venezuela what they did with Cuba. And if you listen to the Elio Piadras and all that, he who giveth can also taketh away. And it's what happened with Cuba. All of a sudden the Russians disappear. So Trump is keeping the pressure on Cuba by restricting what Obama opened up. Obama opened up tourism to Cuba, thinking, oh, well, this will help their economy and we'll come down and spend some of our dollars. And then Cuba will see, I guess it was Obama's thinking, I don't know how the guy thinks, but we'll see the benefits of all this, and we'll have a change of heart, and along will come regime which will like us, Well, Trump doesn't see it that way. He sees this, and if you talk to the Cubans themselves, that's not the way it works. Those dollars don't filter down to the Cuban people. We know that Castro was a multimillionaire while his country was poor. So Trump has announced a new set of policies that are going to keep Americans from being tourists on the islands, because he doesn't want the money to go to the Castro regime. Now, one of the casualties of this is Tim McGraw, who was going to have one of those Havana nights, and he had tickets ranging in price from $2,599 to $5,000 between May 25th and 27th. So I guess a bunch of us tourists were going to go down, and also the Castro elite, they'd probably be comped, or would go down to Cuba for an exciting night in Cuba to listen to Tim McGraw, and that money would be pumped partly into the Cuban economy, where it would never settle down to the people in the street. So just to give you an idea about this, the Cuban government recently increased the salary of the nation's doctors from $26 to $67, okay? And the most recent estimates of Fidel Castro's net worth before his death placed it at around $900 million, okay? So the Cuban agency responsible for the McGraw concerts published a note on their Facebook page that the event was canceled due to, quote, circumstances beyond the control of the event organizers, and that Facebook post is no longer visible. So this is a result of Trump bearing down on two countries that he feels really need to have the pressure put. He's got three countries he's really putting the pressure on. He's putting the pressure on Iran. He's putting the pressure on Cuba, and he's putting the pressure on Venezuela. And so Tim McGraw issued a statement that said, in light of the policies of Trump, he really didn't feel comfortable traveling to Cuba at this time. So he's kept his public comments to that. I think McGraw is a Trump supporter. I don't know, but he certainly hasn't objected to this. So there have been adventure seekers that have come there, and headlines have had other top musicians there. But I think Trump is going to use that as an experience to try to help the Cubans understand that, you know, you're a country that does not permit private companies to exist independent of the government. That's one of the things the communist state Cuba does. It does not permit private companies to exist independent of the government. Pocahontas, really, if you listen to her carefully, that's basically what she wants. She really would like to have the country's, you know, she would really like to have the country's financial corporations subservient to the government. She really like to outlaw them. I mean, to listen to her talk, she's talking exactly like the Castro regime would talk. So Trump's announced a series of measures to prevent American individuals and companies from this permitted cultural exchange, travel, and to engage in tourism that would only enrich the communist regime. Trump is the first in history to permit American citizens to exercise their legal right to sue the Cuban state for stealing their property. Castro expropriated an estimated $8 billion worth of American property in the immediate aftermath of the 1959 Cuban Revolution. Now, until last week, and this is something that you don't know about until you really get down, and this is something that's important. You'll never hear about this on the conventional news. Trump last week recognized the Americans had no legal recourse on this. So Secretary of State Mike Pompeo announced that any person or company doing business in Cuba should heed this announcement that you can sue and try to recover some of the confiscation of your private property. Bolton's also delivered a speech to this effect in Miami, Florida, announcing that Washington would also limit remittances to Cuba and travel to the island by individuals without family there. So they don't even want what they call veiled tourism, and they don't want a glamorization, quote unquote, of socialism and communism. So I think that is very interesting. What does this all add up to? This is what it adds up to for me. Trump keeps his nose his pedal to the metal. He doesn't let up. He knows his objective. He has a worldview. In spite of what the Mad Maxine and these Lulus say, is exactly what he's doing and how he wants to go about doing it, and he's not mincing any words of it. So you got Pocahontas you got AOC over there hallucinating. I don't want to give her too much credit, but she really is kind of amazing in that she had a big diatribe the other day. Oil workers replace pipelines with mangroves. Indigenous people heal the land. I swear this is right out of a scripted Hollywood movie. I just want to go through a little bit of it with you. It's nuts, and but we know that she's a little bit goofy and that she's coming out of the college world. Penny Starr has written about this, and she had Ocasio-Cortez apparently put out a 7-minute video that took place in a future where Democrats control the House, Senate, and White House. Can you imagine the horror of that? And consequently, according to the video, America would be fundamentally transformed into a socialist country, and here's what it would look like. And you tell me if you think this is possible. Fossil fuels are eliminated, okay? Fossil fuels totally eliminated. Everyone is guaranteed a union job, and the Green New Deal saves the planet. Huh? I mean, have you got anything that's left out? I mean, she posted this video, which she wrote and narrated on Instagram. It gave viewers another look at her socialist values she wants to put in place in the United States. And it begins and I have not seen it, but apparently it begins with an older Ocasio-Cortez with a streak of gray hair riding a bullet train from New York to Washington. And she's recalling being elected to Congress as part of, quote, the most diverse Congress in history up to that time, end quote. And she says that this will be the first time children in our community can see people like them navigating the halls of power. And then the video gets down to business, laying out a scenario in which ExxonMobil and politicians hid the truth about climate change, ignored scientists' warning about man-made global warming, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And she's looking back with her gray streak of hair saying 2018 was the turning point. Of course, that would be when she was elected into Congress. You know, it's weird. I mean, there you are. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but it's amazing. The other thing I want to report to you in terms of as the worm turns or does the wheels come off, the CEO of Twitter went to see Trump yesterday. And apparently the reason is, and let's face this, the reason Twitter has any reputation at all is because Trump uses it. And I guess Twitter is recognizing that. Because Trump is such a powerful figure and uses Twitter several times a day, Twitter is, people pay attention to it. So I think what's happened, from what I've heard from other sources, is that the CEO went there to discuss how can we, improve for all people's conversation, Twitter. It's really interesting to think about that. I never thought about it before, that Twitter is popular because of Trump. All those who want Trump to stop using Twitter have got it backwards, right, Jay? They have got it backwards. I want to go back to Gillum here a minute because it's so important that we pay attention to this. There is a big argument going on. There's a big dispute that's going on over Marcus Gillum's appearance at an ethics hearing. This ethics hearing is serious for Gillum. They are going forward with this, and they have subpoenaed Marcus Gillum, who is the brother, of course. He was also on these trips with Andrew Gillum, and he's the guy who in sworn testimony said he lived in a couple of different places, Chicago and, of course, down here in Florida. The question becomes, where were you voting and all that stuff. So what has happened is all of a sudden, they're going to have Marcus Gillum appear in person at the hearing, and he's balked. He has said that he has family matters or come up with some excuse that he can't make it. He'd like to just let his verbal deposition stand in lieu of a live testimony before real people. And, he can't travel from Chicago. This is a hardship on him. He would miss a number of work days. He was planning on attending the wedding of a good friend. I mean, come on. Can you imagine this stuff being actually cited? We got a court document here. It's actually cited in the court document. And I'd like to make it. I'd like to come down there and testify in this very important thing about whether or not my brother was taking, illegal contributions and illegal gifts and all this stuff while he was the mayor and while he was, this guy who ran for governor. But I just can't make it because, I've already missed an excessive number of work days, and I was planning, let me just read it here from the thing, to attend the wedding of a good friend in Chicago during the hearing. And I can tell you what the response was from the judge. Not no, but hell no. And of course, the state's going to pay his travel costs down here. He'll get a free ride. So the advocate response to Marcus Gillum's reluctance to appear was, no, you're coming. You're going to come in person. We're going to put you under oath. That's what they're afraid of. They are, Marcus Gillum, Andrew Gillum, they're afraid, they don't want to get this brother live and be cross-examined under oath because they don't know what in the heck is going to come out of this, and it could end up being more than, quote-unquote, just an ethics conversation. It could be a lot more than that. So we've notified some of the outlets here, media outlets, the Tallahassee Democrat knows about it, and we've let some people know about it, that this is a dispute that's going on that obviously appears to be just nothing more than foot dragging and an attempt to stay away from putting oneself in. Of course, if you were the lawyers for Marcus Gillum, you would have him do exactly that. I mean, you would have him drag his feet and try to get out of it, and that's one of the tactics that they use. So, we'll see how that works out. It's probably not going to work because they're serious about Andrew Gillum, let's put it this way, has gotten on the bad side of the courts, gotten on the bad side of the ethics committee who's looking into this. I would suggest this to you. They have figured him out. They hold him in a suspicious eye, and they don't take him at his word. Now, this is the guy, Andrew Gillum, who came just within a whisker, if you put it that way, of being the governor of the state of Florida. And I just shudder to think what would have happened had we been hogtied, with Andrew Gillum. I mean, it's just, it makes you, toss and turn at night. The World Tribune has covered Victor Davis Hanson, whom I've suggested to you as one of the really bright minds in our country. Victor Davis Hanson has delivered a scathing indictment of the failed coup. Now, we know by now what the failed coup is. It is this attempt by Hillary the liar in cahoots with Obama and all of the Department of Justice and all of the FBI cohorts and the media to overthrow a legitimately elected president whom they didn't like. We know that the unmasking of Trump's business people now, according to the information acquired by the Judicial Watch, started as early as 2015. But Victor Davis Hanson, who is very articulate, very intelligent, says that the first coup in U.S. history in which government bureaucrats sought to overturn an election and remove a sitting U.S. president failed. And he points out it was not thugs in sunglasses, epaulets, or oligarchs in private jets. It was sanctimonious, and this is a very good summation and description of what we're talking about here. Sanctimonious, arrogant bureaucrats in suits and ties used their government agencies to seek to overturn the 2016 election, abort a presidency, and subvert the U.S. Constitution. Now, that's a mouthful. Let me read that back to you. Sanctimonious, arrogant bureaucrats in suits and ties used their government agencies to seek to overturn the 2016 election, abort a presidency, and subvert the U.S. Constitution. So he wrote this in his op-ed entitled Autopsy of a Dead Coup. And he said, furthermore, that they all did this more on the premise that they were moral superiors and had uniquely divine rights to destroy a president that they loathed. And we've been facing that with the left all along. The left has taken the position that it's a moral superior. So this effort was led by Hillary Clinton. The campaign set out to create, disseminate among court media, and then salt among high Obama administration officials a fabricated opposition smear dossier. And Hanson writes that it's failed. Now, the fact that it's failed, as we've been covering for you, has not deterred Sleazy Cummings, Bug-Eye Schiff, or, of course, Fat Jerry, or Mad Maxine, or even Palsy Pelosi. None of them, she's kind of a little bit more guarded, but none of them really has backed off their hysteria. And now you see Kamala Harris and that crowd out there using it as a bludgeon to seek votes in the 2020 effort. So, and then the press is picking up on it, and the press has really been a culprit all along. All this is a fabrication. The second phase of the coup, as Hanson says, was the second special prosecutor. That was the phase. That part of the scandal as far as Hansen is concerned, is going to become recognized. Now, it may not become recognized in the next month or two, although if Barr does what he's supposed to do, it may well happen. Be recognized as the greatest scandal in American political history. And Hansen said that the deep state, if you take a look at it the way people have been looking at it, is by nature cowardly. It operates subterraneanly. It really has no problem telling just outright lies. It is really something that is going to be analyzed later on as an incredible part of our history. Hansen says that journalists themselves consulted with the Clinton campaign to coordinate attacks. Some contract journalists apparently were paid directly by Fusion GPS. Some of the reporters in Wall Street Journal, from which I quote often, and I can tell you that initially when Trump first got in, the Wall Street Journal's reporters and columnists and writers were totally against Trump. Some of them have begun to change now. It's so curious as to why they would be against him. Just on moral grounds. If you really look at this closely, and I think this is what Hansen's saying, where did this so-called disgust come from? It comes from a sense of moral arrogance and moral superiority. So that's what annoys them. That's what bothers them. Meanwhile, they're not looking at themselves in the mirror. They're not looking at their own liars and their own deceptive people, their own cheaters. And maybe in summation here of what we've been talking about today, to go back to how we started today's presentation, is the question, has the worm turned or have the wheels come off? I think they have come off. I think the worm has turned, and I think we will begin now, along with a lot of efforts by the Judicial Watch and refusal to answer subpoenas. It's going to get ugly, but I think it's going to be something that we need to do until we get all the way to the beginning of this and we find out who was originally. We know who was. Now we just have to document it. And I don't think they've been successful in, hopefully we'll know from the Horowitz IG investigation, what is successful in destroying all the documents. Some of the things, ironically, that they had to swear to the ghoul will turn out working against them. And some of the suffering has taken place. CNN is supposedly, its ratings are way, way down now for being so blatantly in cahoots with this left-wing social media mainstream journalism that spread sensational lies about people who wore MAGA hats, and they constructed fantasies about white racists and insulting and beating up people of color, of which the Jussie Smollett thing was obviously an example. The whole charade was manufactured to create a warped view of the election. And now, all the way back to Loretta Lynch, her unethical immunity, that Hansen says was given to Clinton aides Huma Abedin and Cheryl Mills. There is so much over there on that side of the investigation that waits to be discovered and put out publicly, that if you believe we'll get there, then you must wait every day with breathless anticipation, because it's long overdue, and perhaps we've got the right players in place who will now take after this in a professional and well-documented way. And when the story is all finished and the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, maybe the truth will be out. We certainly hope so. Thanks for listening to the Ward Scott Files today. Thanks for Jay Dempsey for helping me. Thanks for all of our sponsors who have been so supportive of the Ward Scott Files. Warthog Command Center out.
Thank you, God bless you, and God bless America.
Do you want to put your business in front of 10,000 new customers? Visit wardscottfiles.tv today for more information on our advertising opportunities.